Hello again. I've spoken before about the strange idea that black people were living in Britain thousands of years ago. But although the idea has been thoroughly demolished, the internet is still full of this false narrative, which is encouraged by people like David Olushoga, of course. This book, which has been highly praised by the Sunday Times and the Observer, as well as many left-wing intellectuals, is a good example. The BBC made a series based upon it, of course, and even now the untruthful claims made in the book can be seen in the form of plaques which the BBC installed at places like Beachy Head near the English seaside town of Eastbourne. Since this silly story in particular will not lay down, even though there's not a shred of truth in it, I thought I might talk about it once more and explain how absurdly wrong the information in books such as this one by David Olushoga actually is. Because Eastbourne is not a very multicultural town, the museum there felt it might be a coup if they could show that they were pioneers of African settlement during the Roman occupation. 7 years ago, they got some old skeletons from that time found near the town tested and engaged a supposed expert in anthropology to examine one female skull in particular. David Olushoga takes up the story. Where are we now? Let's see what he says here. He talks here about the skeleton called the Beachy Head Lady, which was found near Eastbourne. Archaeologists, led by heritage manager Joe Seaman, arranged for a forensic facial reconstruction to be carried out by Professor Caroline Wilkinson, a leading figure in the field. Professor Wilkinson was able to tell merely by looking at the skull, and before she had begun the minute measurements that underpin her work, that the skull of the Beachy Head Lady was that of a sub-Saharan African. Right, then he talks about the radiocarbon testing and the fact that over a millennium before the British began their years of distant wandering and empire building, the Beachy Head Lady, the first black Briton known to us, had lived and died in rural East Sussex by the Channel coast with its white cliffs and green rolling hills. Well, it's very poetic. His book is called Black and British, and he specifically says here that this is the first black Briton known to us. There's something childlike about the faith which Olushoga has in the ability of somebody to glance at a skull and identify it as belonging to a black person. I mean, I don't really believe that that's possible, and I don't suppose many viewers believe it's possible. But anyway, all doubts were swept aside, and Beachy Head Lady became the leitmotif of the new idea that Britain had had a black population during the time of the Romans. The reconstruction of her face, that of a black African, featured in 1,000 Black History Month celebrations. It may be seen in the thumbnail to this video, and we can see her here. This is the Beachy Head Lady, and you'll see that she's tricked out as a black African. Of course, the truth is that the Beachy Head Lady is no more African than I am. The museum in Eastbourne, keen to make even more of the only black person who had ever lived in the town, sent over her DNA to the Crick Institute to be tested, and were horrified to discover that far from being a black African, she was thoroughly European, since her family was from Cyprus. This was known in 2019, 3 years ago, and yet nobody apparently wants this dangerous information to be revealed. Have a quick look round the internet, search for Beachy Head Lady, and you will find that everybody just wishes to ignore the fact that she's from Cyprus. So disappointed have they all been to find out that she's really a European. The museum in York, which has another skull, which is supposedly of an African woman, sent off the DNA of that. This is known as the Ivory Bangle Lady. They sent her DNA off to the Crick Institute, but they're keeping very quiet about the results of that test. I strongly suspect that she has now been discovered to be European as well. In the description to this video, I give a link to a website which mentions the Beachy head lady and confirms her DNA. It's about the only place you will see this. The claim that she was a black African travelled swiftly around the world, but the truth that she is European hasn't really spread at all. I'm sure that some viewers will remember the same thing happened with the remains of Cheddar Man a few years ago. A television programme knocked up a supposed bust of what this 12,000-year-old fellow from Britain would have looked like, and they made him black as the ace of spades. This news too was on all the front pages in Britain, and he too regularly crops up during Black History Month and in children's books about black history. A week after all the newspaper headlines, though, it came to light that the whole thing was nonsense and that nobody actually has the least idea what colour Cheddar Man's skin really was. By then, though, the full story had too much of a head start. What is happening is that as science is brought to bear on this new mythology of race, it swiftly knocks down the silly claims being made by anti-racists. But since newspapers would rather show us pictures of supposedly black Britons from thousands of years ago, they don't print the facts when they finally come to light. This means that the new history of Britain, the untruthful one, is likely to grow from year to year for a little while yet.